New sentencing proceedings in the assault case against former crime intelligence boss Richard Mdluli have been postponed to the 7th and 8th of November. Postponement comes after the court says the documents used for pre-sentencing proceedings are still outstanding. In July, Mdluli and his co-accused Mthembeni Mthunzi were convicted of kidnapping and assaulting his former lover's husband. Oupa Ramogibe was intimidated, assaulted and kidnapped back in 1999 by Mdluli and his co-accused. A year later, Ramogibe was shot dead, while murder charges initially instituted against the pair were then withdrawn. Well, our reporter Sipha Kema, who's been following the story, joins me live in studio now. A very good afternoon to you and thank you so much for being here.
Good afternoon, Dandy.
Well, before we get into what we saw taking place in court today, maybe let's go back and speak about this case and where it actually stems from, and maybe just a bit about this love triangle that we've been seeing as well.
No, look, definitely. I mean, from listening in on the witness testimonies, of course, this was read out during the 2.5-day judgment that was being read out by the judge. And he went, of course, over the reviewed everything and gave the witnesses testimonies. And what they had said and described was really someone who was capable of anything. One of the witnesses had said that he had constantly been going to Oupa Ramogibe's child's mother's house, looking for Ramogibe, but of course couldn't find him as he had already ran off with his former lover. And when he couldn't find him there, he kept going back to, terrorizing them, intimidating them, which is what she had said. And later on, she found one of her former lover's friends and followed her. This is where she was able to track down, the said ex-lover, as including Oupa Ramogibe, where they broke down the door in the bedroom where they were trying to hide away from him. And that's when they got in, dragged them out. She was able to get away. However, Oupa was not able to get away. And that's why, hence the kidnapping charge and the assault charge. According to some of the testimonies, was that they held him up, tied him up, and they beat him up.
Yeah, and I mean, just what you're saying earlier on about some of the characteristics that were described of Mdluli, we've seen as well in the State Capture Commission of Inquiry, him being described as a law unto himself, a man who couldn't be told what to do. He knew exactly what he wanted to do and he did that.
Exactly, and I mean, he was able to get away with so much. As we know, he's got a lot of political influence. So he was, especially with the former President Jacob Zuma during his tenure, he was able to get away with much. When the NPA was bringing up a case against him, one of the leading prosecutors in that case was actually dismissed from the NPA. They dug up an old case of hers, which they found some discrepancies, and they used that case to remove her. So then they found that this one ended up being struck off the roll. And I mean, of course, we know the murder of Oupa Ramogibe as well. What had happened was he was brought in for the murder, but then later on, the charges were actually dismissed against him.
And do we know what will happen regarding the death of Ramogibe? What happens to that case? Who will be held accountable for his death?
It seems as though that has been, now that's officially a cold case. No one is able to really solve that case. But however, the judge did say, even though this kidnapping and assaulting took place in 1999, he still needs to answer for it, as it was not done properly at that time because he used his power to get away from, justice being served onto him for what he had done. So now, of course, now his day of reckoning came late July, where he was then judged and where he was found guilty of kidnapping and assault. Now we're just waiting for the sentencing. Of course, as you mentioned, it's been postponed to the 7th and the 8th of November. Now, these are the pre-sentencing procedures, proceedings, yes, and mitigation as well. Then later on, then he will find out how many years he's been given.
So we're likely to see further delays. And I mean, this is a case that's been dragging for years. We sat for 4 years listening to evidence on this very case. Do we know why?
And today as well, no one was anticipating the postponement, where documents or reports that they need for the pre-sentencing are said to be outstanding, and that social development, which has supposed to supply one of the reports, they say they're going to need 6 to 8 weeks to actually draw up this report. And we caught him on his way out, and we asked him about, of course, the allegations made against him at the state capture testimony yesterday. And he did say that we should carry on watching. Something interesting is coming.
Sure. All right then. And just before we let you go, so what happens now? We do know that this matter goes back to court next month.
Yes.
But what can we expect to happen from now?
I think what we can expect now is more on the state capture side of things than with actually this court case, as there have been postponements before, and it becomes rather quiet up until to a point where the set date for the postponement then comes on, and then that's where we hear something else happening. Like, for example, today, we hear that there's another postponement, 7th and 8th of November. So we'll wait until then to find out what happens. If will they go ahead with the sentencing? Will it be another postponement?
All right. Well, thank you for that. Our reporter, Sipha Kema, who's been attending the sentencing proceedings against former police crime intelligence head Richard Mdluli and his co-accused. We do know that case goes back to court next month. She'll keep us updated on that story.